Destiny time here. We don't always have Peter Levenda on the line, so let's get right to it. So, Peter, now where were we? This was very interesting. Okay, so there was this occult. The CIA is dabbling in the occult, and they are using techniques and things, and they really don't know what they're doing, causing a lot of damage. I don't think people really even understand the amount of damage that was caused. And I wonder now about all those people in the late 70s and wandering around the streets of America, speaking to themselves, and if they weren't some kind of casualty of some of these experiments, actually.
Well, that was one of the points I was trying to make in Sinister Forces, that what we did is we created, an army of zombies, really, of people that we were prisoners in some cases, violent offenders in prison, that we gave massive doses of LSD to, for instance, that we submitted to all sorts of bizarre experimentation. And, people took acid in the 60s for spiritual reasons. I mean, they were taking hallucinogens, they were taking, like peyote, psilocybin, mescaline. They were trying to attain altered states of consciousness, and the idea was to open their minds and to become spiritually aware. And not everybody was. Sometimes, a lot of people were taking it for recreational purposes, if you can imagine taking LSD for recreational purposes. But anyway, so, that was the intent, right? Turn on, tune in, drop out, right? This was the intention of it, and yet these same chemicals, or the natural versions, such as the mushrooms and the peyote, were used in these experimentations on prisoners, on prostitutes without their knowledge, on children in some cases, in mental institutions for children. So, and this is all documented. None of the stuff we're discussing here is speculation. This is all based on primary sources, on real documents, declassified stuff from the Army and from CIA and from FBI. So what you have is a massive government program to use the same tools that shamans have been using for centuries, if not millennia, to open the doorways of the mind, to enable a human being to contact supernatural forces, to have spiritual experiences. These same substances and these same techniques and the same methods are being used to create assassins, to create the perfect assassin, the so-called Manchurian candidate kind of assassin. I mean, we're weaponizing spirituality, and we did this in the years right after the end of World War II. And this, to me, is what is so astonishing, that no one really picks up on this. The government programs are looked down upon, of course, and they said, well, that's just too bad. It was an abuse of, power and all of this. But there was much more to it than that. People who are involved in spiritual quests should realize that the government itself was involved without even knowing it in a spiritual quest, and they bungled it, because there were no safeguards in place. There was no context for the experiences. So this to me is frightening. So what did we create? Who's out there? I sometimes wonder if some of our more famous serial killers were products of this process. Charles Manson, not really a serial killer, but Charles Manson does come to mind as one of these characters. Maybe Henry Lee Lucas and a few others. People who had spent time in the military, or at the prisons where these experiments were taking place, and then came out and started committing horrible crimes. I'm wondering what the connections might be.
Oh, I think it makes good sense to wonder about those connections. Mae Brussel used to say back in the late 70s that the Son of Sam murderers were actually a group of, it was a final test for an assassin school. Could you calmly kill two people in the front seat of their car, police style, firing 6 times from your .44 Magnum? And we thought, oh, you're crazy, Mae, that's the craziest thing we ever heard. But then you start looking at her evidence, and one guy was blonde, and another guy had black hair, and another assassin had red hair, and it's like,
Well, I devoted a whole chapter in Sinister Forces, or actually a number of chapters spread out on the Son of Sam case, because I lived in New York during the time. I was connected to some of the events peripherally, And we all knew back in the late 70s in New York that this was not the work of one person. You know, we knew it was the work of a group. And then later, of course, Berkowitz confessed to this. Even after, you know, he confessed to all the crimes, et cetera, et cetera. He's in jail for life. He's never getting out. He knows that. So now he's coming clean. And he has talked about the people he was involved with. He has identified the murders he did commit, because he did commit some of the murders. And he identified the murders he did not commit.
Wow.
And as we were going through it, the Son of Sam killings in New York, I was painstakingly trying to figure out the calendar that they were using. And I noticed, as I mentioned in Sinister Forces, there was a kind of an occult calendar in effect. Murders being committed during certain periods of waning and waxing moons, et cetera, near pagan holidays, so on and so forth. There was a cult-like connection to what was taking place. Now, the Son of Sam case was reopened. It was reopened some years ago because all the new evidence came out and suggested very strongly that more than one person was involved. So, the connection between serial murder, our intelligence, our bungled attempts at creating, assassins, spiritual initiations, this abuse of shaman technology, if you will, all of this is all together in one very messy cauldron, one very messy witch's brew here of evil things, evil intentions, and unforeseen consequences, which turned out to be just as evil.
And it's like it's almost contagious. Like it's now gone beyond the seed, and it's a contagion, and it's spreading into the bowels of culture. It's astonishing to see kids today are really think vampires are cool. And I find it stunning because, when I was young, I loved vampire movies, but I never thought they were cool. They scared the living daylights out of me. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say exactly. I mean, as I mentioned, you were deconstructing The Shining. We should start deconstructing all the movies that have come out in the last 30 years or so on the occult and how it's been re-engineered in a sense, reimagined in so many different ways. I mean, we poo-poo the occult from a scientific point of view, many people, but at the same time, they're embracing it on the other hand, They're seeing it as cool, they're seeing it as sophisticated in some cases.
They have no idea what they're messing with.
Right.
They really don't. And this is what worries me, and you're right. I actually do deconstruct movies. It's like my hobby. I don't usually write it down, but I can pretty much tell you who's made the film, what their agenda was, what they're into. You know what I mean? It's getting to that point now where I can pretty much tell. And I'll tell you something, Kubrick is on to the same thing that you're on to. And this, I haven't figured out how to break this one yet, but Kubrick has films within films. And in The Shining, the film within the film that no one has ever seen is about these sinister forces. And he literally builds them into the set and into the scenery. And it's quite astonishing, actually. And he's basically saying that these forces have taken over this family, these unknown forces that are all around us, and if you allow them in, then they'll take you over, and it's incredible. I don't know how to get it down on paper yet, but I'm working on it.